Welcome to this edition of the Talk of Simsbury, a show that focuses on pressing or interesting issues facing the town. My name is Dominique Avery. Today we're going to talk about a recently completed study on the town of Simsbury designed to, quote, bring new economic activity into Simsbury in ways that will support businesses that are already here and further strengthen the exceptional character of the town. Joining me for this discussion is Hiram Peck, Simsbury's Director of Planning and Development, and Peter Fairweather, who is the consultant hired to do the study. Thank you both for being here.
Happy to be here.
So I heard Peter make a presentation on his draft report in August, and my takeaway was that Simsbury's resources and capacity are out of the ordinary, but I also heard him caution that we have to really sell ourselves. Guys, was that a fair assessment of what the bottom line?
Yeah, I think it was, and I think the first part of that should not be forgotten, that this is a community that has a lot of resources to mobilize in terms of strengthening its economy. But the world is getting increasingly competitive, and it's really important for a community like Simsbury to make sure its lights are not hidden under a bushel basket. And that's one of the major recommendations at this point going forward, is to make sure the word gets out.
So let's then review what in this big study that you did, what were the biggest positives about the town? We shouldn't hide our light under a bushel,
right.
But what are they?
A few things. The first thing I'm going to mention almost seems like a cliche, but it's extremely important, and that is the quality of life of this community. There was a time, maybe 20 years ago, when quality of life was seen as an important civic characteristic, but now it's at the heart of economic competitiveness. And the reason for that is firms, especially firms that are competing in high skill, high value added services or manufacturing, their key attribute is workforce. And in order for them to really be as competitive as they can be, they need to be able to recruit highly skilled workers, and the way they do that is to make sure that they've got a good job to offer them and a good place for them to live. And that's one of the ways in which Simsbury is really competitive. Money Magazine recently named it as, I think it was number 50. Nationally in terms of quality places to live, and that's a real asset.
I think you said at that presentation in August that we couldn't buy that kind of rating.
Absolutely. I mean, it would have been good news if it was 50th in Connecticut or 50th in New England, but this is nationally, and that's very important. The other thing I think that's worth mentioning is that there are real strengths that already exist in this community. Among that is there's a small but sophisticated manufacturing sector here. And that was a surprise to me.
Was that a surprise to you?
It was.
Okay, so I think it would be a surprise to a lot of people in Simsbury as well. So can you sort of enumerate what they are? I think there are many people here who don't know that.
Sure. Well, it's one of the early community meetings. As the meeting was wrapping up, somebody mentioned, Herman Drive. Well, what's going on Herman Drive? And it was kind of like a toss-off. Well, Herman Drive, we're not so sure about whether that's an asset or not. So at the end of the meeting, I said, I've got to just drive out to Herman Drive and see what's going on in the industrial park. And in a lot of communities that I work in, when people say disparaging things about the industrial park, usually what that means is you drive out to the industrial park and there's a really nice curb cut and some landscaping, and the rest of it is empty because they haven't attracted business. I got to Herman Drive and it was full. There's a lot of activity out there, and the quality of the firms was astonishing. Phonon, Acceleron, Specialty Saw, companies that are really high-end, high-value-added companies.
So let me interrupt you for a
Sure.
second. Phonon, I've been up to Herman Drive. I go to the town recycling center and the community farm, but I didn't know about Phonon until you mentioned it, and then I looked it up. Tell us about Phonon.
Yeah, it's an amazing company, and sort of probably communities throughout the Northeast would, envy having a company like this. I hope I get this right, and with the folks at Phonon should forgive me if I get this wrong. But the technology they use is kind of a fail-safe signal technology, where they convert electronic signals into physical signals and back again as a way of eliminating the noise that an electronic signal can acquire. So it's the kind of thing that's important for weapons systems or aerospace systems where you can't send somebody out to fix that. It's got to work, and it has to work the first time all the time. And they develop chips that provide that kind of technology. It's called a SAW technology, which means some kind of something audio wave. And it's an amazing advanced technology. If it wasn't so specialized, they could do this in the Far East. But the fact is, it's such a sophisticated technology. It's almost like it's handmade technology, as sophisticated as it is. And that requires a highly skilled workforce, and that's why they're here.
So, Phonon, what else is on here?
Acceleron, and I'm not as familiar with the materials they make. For example, they do, I believe, supply some of the materials to Phonon. And that's another strength that Simsbury has, is when you start to see buying, supplying relationships between your local manufacturers, that kind of embeds them into the community more. That means that they're really committed to doing business in the community. They have strong reasons to stay put because there are real advantages to being proximate to their buyers and suppliers. And that was another real attribute that I saw in Simsbury's manufacturing sector. Highly sophisticated buyer-supplier relationships. I know that Phonon has relationships with the University of Connecticut engineering program. And to have a major research engineering institution involved in the manufacturers in the community is also emblematic of a very sophisticated manufacturing sector. And this is all happening on Herman Drive in
That
little old
most
Simsbury.
people don't really know about.
And you drive out there and it doesn't look like a university campus, or there are no ivy-covered halls or anything. Most of the buildings are functional and modest, but the activity that's taking place there is something the community can really be proud of.
So that surprised you about Simsbury. You hadn't heard about. Was there anything else on a positive note?
Oh, sure. I mean,
surprised you?
there are a lot of positives. One of the other major positives was the quality of the Main Street program, the Main Street Partnership. It's really, to give you a sense of it, I was at a meeting this morning in Staatsburg, New York, near where I live in Dutchess County in the Hudson Valley. And I was just chatting with the county planner there and said, I'm going to have to leave a little early because I have to prepare to go to a meeting in Simsbury, Connecticut. And they said, Simsbury, I just saw a presentation about their Main Street program. It's amazing. So, that's another aspect of this community, that it's got a vital, vibrant Main Street in Simsbury Center, and that's not an accident. There's merchants that are working together with the partnership to really deliver a high-quality experience.
Hiram, I want to get you into this.
Sure.
You've been a spectator. So you were not here at the beginning of Main Street, but have you heard, downtown really changed a lot with Main Street.
We worked really closely with Main Street for a number of years now. We worked closely with them, obviously, when we did the town center charrette and all the form-based coding in the downtown as
So
well.
were you here at the beginning of Main Street?
No, Main Street was actually in existence
Right.
before I came.
Okay.
But still, we've developed really close working relationships with them. They've written grants and they've helped us out a great deal in moving Main Street projects forward. And as Peter said, that whole Herman Drive, Wolcott Road area is really kind of an undiscovered area that people don't know a lot about. I can tell you that when Phonon wanted to expand a year or two ago, a couple of years ago now, we helped them do that. They are expanded right now to the absolute nth degree on their lot. And we wish they had more room there to expand even further should they want to do that. So finding the appropriate space and finding how to get those companies that are already here to expand wherever possible has been a real struggle. And we hope that with the Main Street's help and with the Chamber's help, and the landowners, of course, that we can continue to entice those industries to expand right here in Simsbury.
So, so the one thing you didn't touch on, quality of life, which is schools, excellent schools.
Outdoor recreation.
You didn't mention outdoor recreation. I mean, that we have we have unbelievable outdoor recreation. But I think even people in Connecticut don't know about Simsbury. I just met a woman who came this morning who came from West Hartford. And she was exclaiming about how beautiful it was driving across the mountain and driving in this area. And, West Hartford's not exactly urban, but it is just that little distance makes an extraordinary difference. She didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get to that later. But okay, so those are the positives. There are some drawbacks you found to our economic development, and maybe you could enumerate those.
And some of them should be kept in context, but I'll give you an example. That Simsbury would never be able to compete on a cost basis with locations in North Carolina, for example.
Because there it's cheap and here
It's just
expensive.
cheaper. The properties are cheaper, taxes are lower, so that there are industries that will never consider Simsbury. So that's an issue, but that also then really sets a constraint that we're thinking about economic growth for Simsbury and how that's going to occur. It's likely to occur with firms that are already in the Northeast, already maybe in the Hartford area, maybe already even in Simsbury that are looking to expand. So that's factor number one. The other one that came up in some discussions, and again there's some mitigating sides to this, is it would be easier in some ways to attract economic development if Simsbury were right off an interstate.
Right.
And that's certainly true. It would be much easier in terms of getting things like distribution and those kinds of activities. However, one of the things that I discovered wandering around here is this place is 14 miles away from Bradley International Airport. And that goes back to the sophisticated manufacturing, sophisticated services. Often they'll have global reach in terms of who their suppliers are, who their customers are. So an important competitive factor they look for is access to an international airport. And
We're not quite international. We were briefly, but
Right.
but we have access, and it's an extremely easy airport to use.
well,
Unlike
and
Kennedy and
right, and
Logan.
the number of flights that you can get across the nation, are easy. We've actually used Bradley
Out of New
coming
York.
out of New York rather than going to Newark. It's easy. There are a lot of flights, and that's an important competitive factor as well. Is yes, there isn't highway access, but there is airport access. Also, Simsbury is pretty well served by broadband, and that especially the Hot Meadow corridor. That there is fiber throughout that corridor, and there are many places in non-metropolitan areas or in smaller towns where
that's
that
not true.
becomes
Yeah, we
a
take that for
constraint.
granted.
That's
Yeah.
right. So that there are a lot of things about Simsbury that have really positioned it to really reach high in terms of economic development. This is a community that can aspire to high value-added, sophisticated companies. They're here and they can grow here.
Dominique, I could just add to that from a land use standpoint. I couldn't agree with what Peter said more. In addition to that, the types of industries that might come here if I-95 or I-91 or 84 were to run through here are not the types of things that would add to the character of the community that people seem to want. So I think that high level, that sort of sophistication is actually not inhibited by the lack of a highway. It's probably actually promoted.
That's I always want to make that point.
Yeah.
While it's hard to get here, and people say you can't get there from here
Yeah.
often,
Yeah.
The fact that there is no highway has left our community in looking the way it does. Beautiful Main Street that is still filled with historic buildings, and it looks extraordinary, and it doesn't have the same kind of traffic.
Absolutely.
Even just through Route 44. I mean, even that's not on the highway either. But
Yeah, absolutely. It's as people say, it's equally as difficult to get to from anywhere. And I think that what we really want to do is build on that and use the things that are pointed out in Peter's Phase 1 report here to talk a little bit about where we go from here. Ultimately, we'll get to there eventually, but that's a good jumping off point, absolutely.
yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
the other thing I want to mention in terms of advantages that I want to make sure we don't neglect, and that is the work that Hiram and the planning folks have done in terms of positioning this place to grow. That the ability to get pre-approvals, to fast track projects
That's what I was just
is
gonna bring up.
it's a real asset, and it's something, again, folks in Simsbury may take it for granted. Oh, that's the logical thing to do.
I'll tell you what the folks in Simsbury think, because that's absolutely not true. They think everything is difficult to do, and the boards and commissions that are in charge put up roadblocks. I watched the Economic Development Commission where somebody was saying, why isn't Big Y done? And you were saying, you know, we've done everything, it's the private companies, but the town should be doing something. So there is still that reputation that the town is not helping. But I don't think that's true anymore.
I can tell you just from our standpoint, I've worked really hard for the past 7 years since I've come here to make sure that the process makes sense to people, that they don't have to go back through hoops over and over and over again. They go through the process once and hopefully in an expeditious manner and get an answer, whether it's yes or no, in a timely fashion. That's what developers really want to see. So worked really hard to straighten that process out. Hopefully the word is beginning to get out on some of the processes that we do. There are always going to be people in town that say, well, we don't want any growth, we don't want anything to happen, and we've got to balance that character versus growth issue, and that's a tough call.
Yeah, and that's been an issue. I mean, you've probably run into that, but when we first started the Bridge of Flowers, did you get to see that, by the way?
It's beautiful.
There were a lot of people involved, and a lot of people thought it was would be a tourist draw, but there were people who said, oh my God, no, we don't want buses, we don't want tourists here. But that was, 15 years ago, so maybe things have changed.
Working hard on tourism now, absolutely.
Yeah.
No question.
And I just a little bit more about the planning side of it, because that's the aspect of it that's very easy to neglect. Because in some sense, you don't know whether you're prepared or not until a project shows up.
Right.
And I even have to confess, my hometown, many years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, they were sort of threatened by having a Walmart proposal for this property. And they were really concerned about that. They wanted to maintain community character. They wanted some development, but something that was appropriate.
Sounds
and
familiar.
they eventually, through the environmental review process, enough objections were raised so that the developer pulled out. 5 years later, another Walmart proposal came in because the underlying zoning was never changed. So, and that's an expression legally of what do you want as a community. And what's really, I think, exciting about Simsbury is that ability to move forward, to say this is what we want, and we've put the regulations in place in terms of, like, for example, Simsbury Center, so that people understand what is expected. And if they meet those expectations, they'll have an easy time making that development come to fruition. And that's a real asset this community has.
Which I think most people have no sense of. I mean, I think the reputation of Simsbury being difficult to work with is still there.
Yeah, it's awfully difficult to overcome that, I think, in the long term. All we can do is do it project by project basis and try to get the words out. And we coordinate with people at the state level as much as possible. Other groups like Main Street, Connecticut Main Street as well in Hartford, make sure that they get the word out. And I think just, for example, on the town center code that we did, I think I've talked to 49 different towns around the state now since we did that. So hopefully we'll get the word out there over time.
You mean to tell them how you did it as
how
an
we did
example?
It, exactly. Talk a little bit about our attitude towards development, how the process works, and how we were able to get in excess of 600 people to participate in that process. For a small town, that's pretty good. We've done the Route 10 corridor study. We've done low impact development stormwater studies. Many things that sort of fit into what Peter was talking about to sort of make this package fit together. And we've recently done and started on the Weetog Village District study, and we recently did a charrette on the Hartford property. So trying to get all these things to fit together ultimately and slowly knit that patchwork quilt together so that we end up with a really nice product at the end.
So, one thing that you mentioned in August was that we are part of this regional branding effort, the New Haven to Springfield Knowledge Corridor.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to know about it because where I worked, we covered some things that were done about this in Springfield, but I don't think most people here have ever heard of the New Haven Springfield Knowledge Corridor. What is that?
Well, what it is, it's an attempt to really raise the visibility of this area, extending from Hartford.
Sort of like North Carolina.
That's right.
Okay.
And the way that that's done most effectively is on a regional basis. Because most people, if you start to say, there's a great opportunity to someone outside the area and it's in Simsbury, they're going to go, well, exactly where is that? What is Simsbury? Whereas if you can build a regional brand, then you can leverage that. And that's where I think Simsbury is really in a good position. As that moves forward, the Knowledge Corridor becomes more and more known, even if it's just in New England. Simsbury can latch onto that and can say, look, we embody the best of the Knowledge Corridor. You know, we have the kinds of small manufacturers and services that are intended for a place like this. We've got an educated, affluent workforce. We've got a dynamic Main Street. You know, if you're thinking about locating in the Knowledge Corridor, if you've learned about it through economic development conferences, Simsbury is a place to consider.
So what are the sorts of businesses that your study is recommending that Simsbury should be going after?
And there are a few. You know, we talked about the sophisticated manufacturing, and also the analogous with that would be the services. Companies that might be engineering services, software companies that provide kind of the raw materials for sophisticated manufacturers in aerospace and similar industries that are in the Hartford region. And it's important to remember that some of that will be growing what's already here as well as attracting folks in. Another kind of industry that is complementary, but it's a very different game altogether, is the whole tourism and culture. That, you know, at one of the meetings, maybe it was in August, we were talking about businesses that attract a lot of people, and are we ever going to be able to sustain that, and will people come in large numbers? And it turns out that sort of the wedding business in Simsbury already does that. You know, it's become a major venue for weddings. People look to it, and we're just starting to understand the economic multipliers associated with that, and how do we build in other activities, rooms, lodging, to really make that an even bigger contributor to the Simsbury economy.
I'm just going to say one thing on my behalf.
Sure.
I'm a member of the tourism committee here. I've been a member for years, and it has been our theory always that tourism, that kind of thing, is our major asset. And we felt it took a long time for the Economic Development Commission to come to that conclusion as well. So.
One of the things that you mentioned, just to go back just a little bit, I mean, is Peter talked about the Knowledge Corridor and how little people know about it. But I would probably pretty much guarantee that people have heard about the busway, and they have an opinion, either pro or con, about the busway. And one of the difficult things about this whole process is the busway is something that fits into nice little sound bites. And people either like buses or they hate buses or whatever. This is a very difficult concept for people to understand, and they have to be able to be willing to absorb more than a sound bite. They have to be willing to look at it in a little bit of depth.
Right.
So I think that's really critical as well. So we're hopeful that the Riverview, for example, was one of the first buildings that we actually got approved when I came here, and I'm glad to see that that's working out well.
Well, you ought to be very pleased about that, because it really is making a huge difference in this wedding industry. So we're talking too much. We're running out of time. I'm not going to get to ask all the questions I wanted to, but what I do want to ask about is, what do you think we need to do to market ourselves? How do we tell our story?
Well, there's a few words. First of all, to develop a clear sense of what it is that Simsbury is selling, and I think we've started to do that. You know, we've got a sense of what are the sectors that are the most promising, what are the aspects of the community that make it attractive. Now we need to put that into a single package. The good news, I think, is we can work closely in that effort with the Main Street Partnership, because they've done a great job of packaging.
Of branding and packaging,
yes.
yeah.
And, you know, let's leverage that rather than creating something that's entirely brand new. And then it's, you know, how do we reach out to the intended audience? And some of that will be businesses that are in the greater Hartford metro area and New England. Another important constituent in that is the whole tourism industry. The third, that is equally important, are the people in Simsbury themselves. Part of this effort needs to make people aware of the assets that you take for granted, that you see every day and you figure the whole world is pretty much set up just like this, are unique to this place and are really a source of potential growth in the future, and a source of, should be a source of considerable pride. And part of that will be to get everybody on the same page, so that when people come into town, somebody who might be a business owner, and they ask somebody, well, you're from Simsbury, what do you think?
And so that they don't say, gee, the taxes are too high, and you know, complain about something. You know, I agree. And I absolutely think that people do not understand what they have here. They do not understand it.
And one last thing, if I can just
Sure.
piggyback on that. one of the exciting things about Simsbury is there's a fairly diverse amount of offerings in terms of the physical product. You know, that you've got Simsbury Center, you've got Weetog, you've got Tariffville, and all of those places, and there are others, have distinct identities. And what's being called the North Village area, the Wagner properties up there. So that there's really a number of different opportunities for Simsbury to sell itself to different audiences within those targets, and that's really exciting.
Okay, so I just got the word that we have 2 minutes left. I can't believe how fast this went. The top message that that each of you would like our audience to walk away with. Hiram, let me start with you.
Sure. I think that one of the things that Peter said early on in his study and his findings is that Simsbury has to be marketed as an authentic place. And that's a phrase that stuck with me very...
That's also what the state tourism department says.
It absolutely is true, and I think the more people realize that, the more we can build on that, and then implement that in our follow-up studies, I think is really critical.
And the only part of that authenticity is this is a place that has and can support high value-added, sophisticated businesses. And we need to get the word out.
So the bottom line, you're not from here, you've got fresh eyes. Tell the people of Simsbury what they should think about their town.
That this is a high quality place. This is Money Magazine said it, this is a national treasure. We're talking about top 50 in the United States. And there are communities that I've worked with over the last 15 years that would give their eye teeth to have 3/4 of what Simsbury has.
Well, on that note, God, thank you so much for being here. I'm sorry the time went so fast. We could have talked for a whole hour, I think. I'd like to thank everyone here at SCTV, especially our volunteer director, Althea Greeny, and our volunteer camera people, and of course the office for getting all the volunteers here to get us on the air. And thanks to Karen Handville, who is running one of the cameras, who is our manager. Thanks especially to my guests, Hiram Peck and Peter Fairweather, who is here from New York, upstate New York. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you missed any part of this show, you can always watch it on our website at simsburytv.org, or for updates or when our programs air, catch up with us on Twitter or like us on Facebook. And you can see the study itself on simsburystrategy.com.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.